For players of the Los Angeles Clippers, it is a time of triumph indeed. Just hours after the team owner was banned from the sport, the players won an emotional playoff game as the crowd chanted their new slogan, "We are one." With another win last night, they're heading to the next round, thrilling victories they will always remember. However, the ugly comments by owner Donald Sterling will not be forgotten either. Captured on tape telling his girlfriend not to bring black friends to games. Response from the NBA's commissioner was swift.
I am banning Mr. Sterling for life from any association with the Clippers organization or the NBA. I am also fining Mr. Sterling $2.5 million, the maximum amount allowed under the NBA Constitution.
Andrew Rosario, Arise TV Commissioner, right here. What message do you have for the Clippers and their fans and their fan base in terms of moving forward from this point on?
My message to the Clippers fans is this league is far bigger than any one owner.
Well, the woman Sterling made the comments to told ABC's Barbara Walters that he's said similar things in the past. Also in the past, Sterling settled a huge lawsuit for housing discrimination. Why was nothing done about his attitudes until that tape was released? Sadly, this is not an isolated incident. It comes on the heels of horrendous statements made by a rancher in Nevada, Cliven Bundy. He was in the news for refusing to pay grazing fees to the government. Well, it all seems to prove once again that the idea of a post-racial America is indeed only an idea. The divisions of race are still very much with us. Charlayne Hunter-Gault is uniquely able to provide perspective on this. In 1961, Charlayne faced threats and bigotry when she became the first African-American woman to enroll at the University of Georgia. Of course, she went on to a very distinguished career in journalism, and she is an advisor for Arise News. And Ms. Gault, it's an honor to have you with us.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. You have a column on the New Yorker website saying there are lessons to be learned from the Sterling and Bundy stories. Explain that.
Well, you know, these are very visible examples of racism, and I think everybody would agree with me that it is racism that caused those words to be spoken in both instances. But if you'll notice from the comments that followed my column and other columns on this issue, racism truly is alive and well, and there are a lot of people out there who are quite angry. And I'm afraid that part of the problem is that a lot of racism perpetuates itself in silence. Although we have very good examples. Look at our prisons where the majority of the men there have been sentenced for drug cases are black, whereas white prisoners or even white people who get involved in those kinds of crimes don't get the same punishment. The same is true with affirmative action. Now that many campuses can no longer have to use affirmative action, the number of black students is dropping. And this at a time when in the next 20, 30, 40 years, we're going to have a country where people of color are going to be in the majority. So it's time to really drill down into this issue now because if it continues this way, our country, not just black people, but our entire country is going to suffer.
Indeed. We're going to add two more voices to this conversation. Dorian Warren specializes in equality issues, and I also believe that we have Nsenga Burton with us also from Washington, D.C. I want to say something, too. My father used to make a comment some time ago that, racism will die with the old folk. He comes from Cairo, Illinois. This was very much in the news back during the Civil Rights era. But I'm not sure if that's true, and I want all of you to chime in on this because you see now in various parts of the country that, racism still exists with a lot of young people as well.
Sure, I'll jump in. There's 20th century racism and 21st century racism, and we have to expand our definition of what racism means. So yes, part of it is personal bias and animosity by individuals, but we also live in the world where you can have racism without racist, meaning there are impacts on communities of color of certain policies that exacerbate racial inequality. So Ms. Hunter-Gault actually mentioned prison and incarceration and criminal justice policies that disproportionately impact African-American communities. We have to look at individuals, yes, but we also have to look at policies and the impacts of racism on communities in addition to singling out individuals.
And Nsenga, you know, it has been said that you can't force people to like you, but you can force people to respect you. Thus, of course, the civil rights movement and also laws now to enact change. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that we've had to force people to like us or to respect us, as you would say, for centuries. Most people, if left up to their own free will, I won't say most, but many people, when left up to their own free will, have to decide if they're willing to sacrifice something so that someone else can gain something. Most people will not do that. That's why we do have laws. That's why we do have policies in place to protect people. And so when you have Don Sterling, who's actively discriminating against Black and brown people in the housing market, that translates into different forms of racism. And to piggyback on what your other experts said, I think that racism, the challenge of racism is also the narrative that racism has ended.
Right.
The fact that people don't believe that. As a college professor, I have students who arrive who absolutely believe that racism is over. There's no such thing. There's no covert racism. There's no overt racism. And that's just something that people in my generation and generations before me experience and can't let go of. So until we change that narrative and acknowledge the fact that racism does in fact exist and critique and engage the incidents of racism in a real and meaningful way, like this Don Sterling incident, you know, many people will continue to believe erroneously that racism is not a problem.
Right,
and that's a problem.
Right. Charlayne, I want you to comment on this. You know, there's been a lot of talk, and I'm sure you've heard this, all of you have heard this actually, on the whole issue of ownership and whether or not that Mr. Sterling should have this team taken away from him. And some people are saying, and I guess it brings some pause to a question that, well, look, you know, he was caught about a thought that he has or thoughts that he has about people. If this team is taken away from him, this could be an open season for all sorts of people who might have conflicting views, whether they are right or wrong. What do you say to that?
I don't have anything to say about Sterling and that whole issue. That's been interrogated to death. The problem is we don't talk about it enough, and when we do talk about it, we don't have enough conversations about what to do about it. And moreover, we have a college professor here. I know that in the schools of America, the history of Black people in America is not being taught. So the people who are young people who are racist today don't have any sense of why so many Black people are angry today and upset that this issue isn't being resolved because it's not being talked about, it's not being taught in the schools, and the resolutions are not being interrogated.
Well, you know, I think that's a good point. And, you know, Dorian and Nsenga, I want you to chime in. And also, I remember Calvin Butts, a very prolific minister here at the Abyssinian Church in New York City, said many years ago in a public service announcement, you could eradicate racism overnight if you just educated people. And to an extent, I think that's pretty much true. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I think we have to do a lot more in terms of education. We have to change our curriculum to make sure that a full Black history is taught, not the kind of Black history that Clive and Bundy thinks is what happened in this country. So education is step one, but it's not going to get us all the way there. We have to evaluate all of our policies as well. So if you look at, for instance, the extension of Obamacare, 24 states in the South refused Medicaid expansion. That has a disproportionate impact on people of color. That is a, therefore, racist policy, the fact that Republican governors won't expand on Obamacare. So I think we have to educate people and we have to look at individual attitudes, but it's not enough to just say people are racist or not. We have to look at the broader sense in which our public policies in particular are having racial effects on communities of color.
Good point. You know, but in no way do I want to blame ourselves for anything here, folks. But how much are we a part of this equation? Of course, we witnessed recently the NAACP giving an award to Sterling. And you see this kind of house Negro mentality among some of us. How much of a responsibility do we have in order to change the narrative here, to change this equation? Nsenga, I want to start with you.
We have a great responsibility, and to point out what that means when someone who's the head of an organization that's dedicated to the freedom of people of color for over 100 years, for over a century, would give an award to someone who only gave $5,000 to the organization and some free tickets. So that is an example of internalized racism, internalized oppression, which is also an extension of racism. So we not only have to look at these incidents, but we have to make them applicable to real-life events. And this is a real-life event that students can learn from and teachers should help them with.
Charlayne, I want to end with you in a sense. We've got 2 minutes left, but I want you to anchor this and bring this thing home for us. You know, you witnessed history more so than many of us have in a very personal way. Here we are in 2014, and we see situations like this. I guess the question is, with organizations like the NAACP, the National Urban League, and like, do you think that they've outplayed their usefulness? Do you think that they perhaps need to be revamped? Where do we need to go now to change what we are witnessing right now in the 21st century when it comes to race?
Well, first of all, I don't think we should blame the entire NAACP for what happened with the local chapter in California.
Understood.
We have the Legal Defense Fund and other organizations that are working on this. But I think we need to go back to those coalitions we had during the Civil Rights Movement. I just spoke here at a Holocaust event, and I remember that Jewish people, white people, all kinds of people gave their all, including their lives, to help liberate black people. And we have to work on those coalitions and, again, educate. And I've written a book called To the Mountaintop, My Journey Through the Civil Rights Movement, and I hope that it will be taught in schools because it gives you a perspective on why we have the attitudes that we have today and the problems as well.
Right. And, you know, I think anybody would agree that things are better than they were back, I guess, in the 50s and 60s. But, I mean, how far have we really come? Dorian, I want you to answer that.
Well, we've come a long way, obviously, right? When President Obama can tell jokes and actually offer a racial critique last night at the White House Correspondents' Dinner on Clive and Bundy, for instance, and others, I think it's a moment where we are, in many ways, much more advanced in terms of racial equality. At the same time, where, as we've all been saying in the last few minutes, we have a long way to go. We still have to educate. I'm going to teach your book, by the way, Ms. Hunter-Gault. We have a long way to educate our students and young people on racism and on the multiple types of racism that still exist in our society. So the work is never over. We have to keep the work going.
Right. Okay. We're going to have to end with that. Charlayne Hunter-Gault, thank you so much. And Nsenga, Burton, as always. And Dorian, thank you so much.
Thank you.